I'm at the point where I think the US just deserves to burn, basically, at this point.
I agree completely. I have zero interest at this point in preserving anything, any institution of the U.S., the U.S. as a concept, the U.S. as a people. I would say the same for Britain. I mean, it just deserves to burn. You know, I was listening to your stream with Panama and Yiz, and I can't at this point understand what this interest is in like preserving this class of persons generally we call white people. Because look at the state of the place. I mean, just look at the state of the country. What do you want to preserve in aggregate in this place, for God's sake? I mean, I think what we need is just as we talk about with Riding the Tiger, is just figure out a way to have a diaspora of sane people of any ethnicity really survive long enough to, you know, hopefully pick up something from the ashes. But, you know, I look at the state of things and I'm just like, what the hell reason is there to have some general ethnic preference at this point? Everyone's insane. You know, I look around me and I see nothing but like the things from Invasion of the Body Snatchers around me. It's terrifying.
I think there is. I think that you're right to say that there is a bit more hope in America, because there are still places in America you can go and get lost, so to speak. There are places you can go to escape, at least to a large degree, the hands of the state. Whereas you can't. There's no place you can do that in the UK. You can't escape.
Yep. Well, I mean, I'm planning on doing that, and I think that's just the way to go, right? I think, you know, I did put out that video, no exit, right? But I did make the point that, you know, just because they say these things doesn't mean they're necessarily going to come for you everywhere. And I think that's really the goal, is figure out how to live as a diaspora for perhaps centuries. You know, I mean, that's fine. I think people need to realize that you have to rank order survival at this point above all other concerns.
Recently, in my corner of the internet, there's been a type of friendly in-house disagreement, roughly between academic agent, Charlemagne, distributist, and Panama Hat on the one side, and Yiz the Eunuch and Don the Pleb on the other, all of whom have their respective YouTube channels. The former group subscribes to a more elitist and ride the tiger approach, where one withdraws from the larger society to a certain extent, doesn't engage in politics at all, and becomes an aristocrat of the soul, so to speak. The game is to level oneself up, create our own parallel institutions as best we can, in a manner not a million miles away from philosophical agorism, and focus on survival, and hopefully, once everything comes crashing down, the elite among the right may step into the breach and enforce a new and healthier order. Academic Agent and Charlemagne, the first two from the intro to this video, believe that the United States and UK in their present states deserve to collapse. Later on, Charlemagne, in a conversation with Mr. D, goes on to say that it shouldn't be in our interest to save normies enthralled by the system. Yiz and Don, on the other hand, separately and in other videos, aren't unsympathetic to the belief in parallelism, or even the belief that the West to a certain extent deserves to collapse. However, they see political action on some level as necessary, that the left is coming not just to triumph, but destroy us and our way of life. It represents an existential threat to us and our way of life, and parallelism is doomed without some degree of wider pushback against left and safer zones in which to operate in. My addition to this debate isn't so much theoretical, but rather experiential. My living situation, both past and present, is quite a bit different from most people. I have spent most of my life in a very remote, sparsely peopled state in the United States. Now I've been living in South Africa, or perhaps I should say, America's future, for the past several years. My home state offers what YouTuber Charlemagne terms exit, more so than just about anywhere else in the world. There's vast expanses of land, a comparatively unobtrusive and benevolent state government, and depending on where you live there, should Washington collapse or go crazy, it wouldn't affect your life as much as most places. Affirmative action and national gun laws can't bother you too much if you're a fisherman living 6 hours away from any town over 6,000 people. This is particularly the case if the local government refuses to enforce all or certain aspects of a given piece of federal legislation, or state troopers are opposed to and uninterested in fulfilling the aims of the cathedral. Local elections in such an environment aren't subject to the same fortification that you find in bigger cities in the continental United States. With comparatively little organizing or cajoling in such a place, you can still elect small-town mayors or even mid-town or big-town-sized mayors and local legislatures who will be capable of doing a lot to keep your town nice as it is. This particular state's government has acted as something of a buffer, both in the press and presently, against some of the more egregious diktats of Washington, D.C., making it a felony within the state to enforce certain federal gun laws, for instance, and essentially ending the lockdown across the state months ahead of most places. The benefits of having even semi-competent local government become much more profound in a place like South Africa, my current home. I've spent the past several years of my life in South Africa, and it is about as different from my former state as anywhere. Huge swaths of the country, frankly, are proper shithole status. They're not shitholes because they're poor. In fact, there are quite a few rural areas in this country especially that are poor but remain culturally quite civilized. No, these places are shitholes because they've degraded into a type of barbarism, social decay, violence, sadism, and corruption that doesn't have a Western parallel. On top of this, the national government of South Africa is actively predatory towards any aspect of society which still functions, sucking it dry well beyond the peak of the Laffer curve, targeting minorities rhetorically and through legislation by excluding them from certain opportunities, threatening to expropriate the property of people who make the country work, crippling the economy with rolling blackouts and turning the state into a massive patronage machine, and allowing or being powerless to stop crime running rampant. National politics in this country, as in America and probably the UK, is a lost cause. Even should the ANC fall below 50%, they're likely to form a coalition government with the more radical, explicitly black nationalist, and openly Leninist economic freedom fighters. Because of the dire political situation, South Africa is perhaps on the cutting edge of parallelism, with organizations like Sakeliga forging large business associations, the Solidariteit trade union and its legal arm, AfriForum, organize in lawfare against the state and even help also with safety in rural areas, among many other things. The development of private security in the country is another example of parallelism in action. In 1994, there were about 100,000 policemen and 100,000 security guards. Currently, there are about 150,000 policemen and over 500,000 security guards. My current neighborhood has essentially a privately funded policing service and ambulance service at the bottom of the hill. Most ambulances in South Africa are in fact private. To avoid the terrible and sometimes dangerous state schools, parents who can try to get their children in private schools, with more and more turning to homeschooling. Private medicine, as yet, has been allowed to operate. It provides a comparatively affordable, high quality of care, running parallel to the often terrible state hospitals. If people want to get their potholes fixed in some parts of the country, they'll routinely have to fix them themselves, and they do. The predominantly Afrikaner members of Solidariteit crowd-funded and built their own Afrikaans technical college and catered to a predominantly Afrikaner and colored clientele, and are in the process of planning and constructing an independent Afrikaans university as well. The functional parts of society in this country run largely parallel to the state and may in the future serve as a model for what unfortunately has to be done in other Western nations. It might seem like parallelism is the only game in town here in South Africa, certainly far more advanced than anywhere else I'm aware of. If I may use the term, the elite of the Afrikaners in particular have managed to organize and facilitate many of these impressive networks, making life better and more secure for the members of these various organizations. These are all clear points in the favor of the vision outlined by Academic Agent and Company. However, to say that this process is entirely devoid of engagement with the state or politics is a mistake. Much of what these organizations do is engage in lawfare to compel the state to restore property to individual victims of land invasions or expropriation, while paving the way for other parallel institutions. Also, while the national government is completely hopeless, local and municipal government can in fact have a big impact on whether one's local community is a nice place to live in or not. Some of these might seem like minor details, but they matter a lot to the people who live there. The Western Cape Province is doubtless the best governed province in South Africa, and incidentally, the only one not under control by the ANC. While many roads in other provinces look like moonscapes with dead traffic lights, that isn't the case in the Western Cape, just as one minor example, though important, again, for the people who live here. The provincial government of the Western Cape is trying to position its municipalities to be able to purchase electricity from independent suppliers, unshackling themselves from the dead grip of Eskom, the national power supplier whose mismanagement routinely plunges South Africa into darkness. The Western Cape province itself is trying to engage in a type of parallelism. These power outages make it difficult to engage in commerce, costs the country billions, and puts a hard cap on economic growth, apart from any other factors. Other municipalities, governed by the wrong sort of people, will frequently have outages that last for days, with local transformers blowing up through lack of maintenance, and the localities not having the ability or resources to fix them. Every rand that can be spent on civil servant salaries in these localities that can is, and they'll leverage their municipalities to the hilt to do so, while everything else crumbles around them. In contrast to a place like where I live, basic services are able to be provided, budgets balanced, and areas made objectively more livable through the election of more competent and less corrupt politicians. This is a fact seen played out over and over across this country. Such places also can be of assistance to the aforementioned parallel organizations and help give them room to operate. Basically, the country may be a wreck and the ANC may be the enemy of the people, but your neighborhood or town doesn't have to be that way. The difference between living under the kind of corrupt local government that you're likely to find here and an even semi-competent one is illustrative. The first will turn the municipality into an explicit patronage network, bankrupt the town, drive business away, make it explicitly more dangerous, look the other way on land invasions, and periodically fail to provide either electricity or water. The other won't. Now, things are nowhere near this bad, but the same principles are also in play in the US and the UK. These are points to Don the Pleb and Yiz. The point of local political action isn't to revive the system. The system nationally is unsalvageable, and it does deserve to collapse. Agreed. You can't vote out the cathedral. This is true. But what local political action does is help keep your neighborhood, town, or even state or province from being a shithole and potentially acting as a buffer to Washington, London, or Pretoria. If all you care about is surviving until the collapse and having elites rise from the ashes to forge the based society, then having functioning localities is good for survival. If you want strong families led by fathers with the right ideas and mothers to raise their children without fear of bodily harm, then they're going to need somewhere to live. That place is going to have a community. That community is going to be in a town, county, borough, or municipality. That means politics, whether we like it or not. As to the fate of the normies and why we should care, the fact is normies have always been the majority and will always be the majority. To hate them is like hating dogs because they bark. It's what they do. But imperfect as they are in fact made in the image of God and deserve our best wishes and at least some respect for that reason alone, if none else. That doesn't mean we can save them, and they don't largely deserve what they vote for, but it's nonetheless true. To close, I am the true third positionist. National democracy has failed. National politics will probably continue to be fortified. Certain corrupt cities will also probably have their elections fortified. The masses aren't ever likely to get it. We have been and always will be governed by elites and should improve ourselves and build parallel institutions as well as we can. We need to emphasize survival and having something worth carrying into the future. But to say that this isn't contingent on at least some degree of local politics for most people or engaging adversarially with parts of the state on the legal front isn't correct. You won't get the plebs to rise up and throw off their chains or vanquish Globo Homo. But you might be able to get them to unite around the town big man and make where they live a nice place for them and their families. This has been Mr. Patriarch. If you've enjoyed this video, the best thing you can do to help me out is subscribe if you haven't already, like, comment, and share with somebody who you think will benefit from this material. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Patriarch, out.